All right, good morning, everyone. So we'll get started. So today we'll see about your task communication and different communication protocols. Followed by that, we will see some synchronization and techniques and issues associated with that. Okay. So yesterday we saw about task communication. Hello, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm in class, ma'am. Can I call you back at 10? Yeah, I'll call you at 11. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yesterday we saw about cooperating process and competing process. Cooperating process is something that there are dependencies between the processes. The dependencies could either be data dependency, like meaning like I want to share my data or I need some data from other tasks. The other dependency could be just communication. For example, we have audio and video streaming, right? So then these two are different processes, but they will have to go hand in hand. So they have to just synchronize. That's all. There's no data communication. The other one is competing process. So in competing process, you actually don't have any dependency, but these processes compete for a resource. For example, printing, right? If you want to print something, so two processes want to print at the same time. Only one will get the printer. Okay, so there is a contention, like who will get the printer. Okay, so that's how it is. So as we see, we need some kind of a communication between these processes. Okay, so it's called as inter-process communication or inter-task communication. There are different types of these IPCs. The first one is shared memory, and then next we have message passing, and finally we'll see remote procedure calls. In shared memory, you have through global variables, and there is something called pipe and memory objects. Okay, so these three techniques come under shared memory. In message passing, you have four, like message queues, mailbox, and then mail slot. It's very similar to mailbox, and then you have signals. Okay, so and then finally we have remote procedure calls. In IPC, so shared memory, right? Shared memory is a concept where two processes share one memory area. Okay, and then it's like some kind of a buffer. Okay, so you put whatever you need to share in this buffer area, and the other process can also see. Okay, so it's a shared variable kind of thing. Sometimes we use in our program, right, like the global variables. So we use global variables as kind of a buffer, like we use it to communicate across functions. It's similar to that. Okay, but this is between processes. That's all. Pipes pipes, it's better understood when you think of using pipes in your this thing, your Unix command prompt. There are, if you remember, you can actually do grep and then sort, right? So things like that. You can actually combine two or three commands. Yeah, yeah. Is there a question?
Sorry for interrupting. Actually, your voice is not clear.
Voice is not clear. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, let me connect to a different network. College network is slow, I think.
Okay.
All right.
So, but like I can't hear anything.
Hold on, hold on. Okay. Is it better now?
Yes, sir, better.
Okay, fine. All right. So, right. So I just quickly go back. So previously we just saw shared memory. Shared memory is nothing but you use a common memory area, and then two processes will communicate using the common memory. This is something similar to your global variables that you use, right? In your programs, you use global variables to communicate between different functions, like very lazy way of programming. Instead of passing a parameter, right, you use a global variable and then all the functions can use it. So similar to that, you use it for processes. So different processes can communicate by just using some shared memory area. Okay, so that's the concept here. Am I audible? Is it clear? My voice is clear?
So, not that clear. Actually, your voice is breaking a lot in between.
Really, even now? Hello? And what can I do?
Yes, sir. In between, it's happening.
Okay. Hmm.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm trying my hotspot. We'll see. I don't have any other
Okay.
option here. Okay. All right. Is it better now?
Yes, better. So if it breaks again, I'll just interrupt you in between.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Please feel free to do so. Okay. So in pipes, what we have is it's a pipe, right? It's a shared memory area, and in this pipe, what happens is it's again like a buffer where the process, right? It actually writes its output into this buffer region. Okay, and the other process will start reading from this region. It's more like a pipeline or a FIFO queue kind of thing, right? So it's similar to your other shared memory whatever we spoke, but here it is kind of like a temporary memory region. In shared memory, the previous one what we saw, or it's not a fixed region. Okay, it's a temporary buffer, so this address could
Sir, it's
change.
breaking again.
Oh, it's breaking again.
Yes.
Wait, man. All right. Hmm. Okay. Huh. Any case, you guys, you give your attendance. Okay. We'll see for another 5-10 minutes. If this persists, then I will record the video and I'll upload it. Okay. So your pipe works that way. So it's a temporary buffer where your process will write the area. I mean, the process will write the data to this area, and the other process will read it from here. Okay. So they can be either anonymous pipes or named pipes. Next, we have memory mapped objects. In memory mapped objects, what happens is, so we actually fix a block of memory. Okay, and then you start writing to this area. Okay, so then what happens, you write to this region, and you use this particular region for all your communication. This is same as the shared memory we saw, right? So shared memory is that's the concept, but here in that there are two. One is your pipes, the other one is memory mapped objects. So this is the memory mapped object. The next type is called message passing. Now this is very interesting. Okay, so this is it's a very nice way of communicating between processes. In your process, you can send messages like how you're sending email or you're sending your chat texts, right? Similarly, you have a send message and you have a receive message, you have broadcast message, you have synchronized message, you have different messages, and then you can pack your message inside that a function, and then you can pass that message. Okay, you can send a message to this message queue, and it will be so your other process will receive the message from the message queue. Okay, so this is your message passing. And then we have mailbox. Mailbox is again, as the illustration suggests, right? So it's like it's a mailbox. You actually it's again a buffer. You post all these messages to that mailbox. Now tasks, right? So individual tasks or processes can subscribe to these mailboxes. Okay, so you can have different mailboxes. So you can have a task one will have a named mailbox. Okay, and then whoever is interested to know about task one's mailbox will subscribe to it. Okay, so task all these 2 3 4 will subscribe to this mailbox, and you'll get the message. Okay, similarly task one can have another mailbox also, that may not have these tasks but some other task. Similarly task 2 may have its own mailbox where some other task is interested. It's something like what we now have in Twitter, right? In Twitter, what do you have? So you have a message and then people can follow. So it's something similar to that. So your tasks can follow to this mailbox. Okay, so that is how your mailbox works. Everything ultimately boils down to a buffer. That's why everything is shared. It comes under shared memory model. And then finally we have signals. So sometimes you don't have to send data, but you just have to send a signal. For example, you want to fork, you want to join, and things like that, right? So you don't have to send some kind of a data there. I just need a signal from somebody. And especially when it comes to interrupts, right? I don't need all the data. I just need that some device is raising this signal. So in that case, your signal will be used for communication. Okay. And finally, we have a remote procedure call. In remote procedure call, we use a remote method invocation. Okay, so what happens is, so you initiate a socket. Okay, so the remote procedure call can be either within the same CPU, or it can be across different CPUs through a network. Okay, so in either case, you will use your socket. You will use your TCP or IP or any network protocol, and then you will use the communication protocol to communicate. Okay, so you will, so it's something like this, right? The other CPU has a process, and that process has a procedure means a function. Okay, you want to invoke a function that is in another CPU. Okay, so this process will do a remote invocation to this procedure. Okay, so through the network, you can imagine you're actually accessing database, a remote database from your current web application, right? So these are all like they use this remote procedure calls. So you're actually invoking a database command from a remote network, right? So it has to go through a network, and it calls some other function of some other procedure. Okay, so that is how it is done. It can be in the same CPU also. Okay, in either case, you have to create a socket. Okay, so next, so it's about this. We'll just go to the next topic. We will see about task synchronization. Okay, so task synchronization, it's very important. So you have multiple tasks, right? We saw how so is my voice clear now? Is it manageable, guys?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
No. Oh god. Okay, please do bear. Okay, so anyway, I'm recording, so the recording will be fine, because I mean it's not through network, right? So I'll actually anyway post it. Hmm? Or you can just I mean, if it's really horrible, we'll see, you can drop off. Okay, I'll post it later too. But I mean, this is, I mean, I've tried out other options. So I have only two college network or my hotspot, and if both are bad, I don't know what to do. Okay, anyway, we'll continue. Okay, so task synchronization. So you need a proper synchronization between different tasks. Okay, because you are sharing data, that's one thing, and the other thing is you need you don't want the system to go to a weird state. Okay, so because of all these reasons, you need the processes or tasks to synchronize. Now let us look at a very small example. Okay, don't get intimidated by the code. It's a very simple example where two processes are updating a buffer. Okay, so here one process is updating the buffer from 0 to 5, and the other process is updating the buffer from 6 to 10. Okay, so here what happens is, if you take the so if here your counter plus plus is a single instruction. Okay, it seems like it will work, but you may enter into some problem. I'll tell you what problem. That counter plus plus actually translates to three different three different instructions. So here in this case it's x86 instructions, so it is translated to three instructions here. Okay, so now what happens is, let us say your process A is actually uh, it has loaded the current counter value. Okay, and then it has a context switch. Okay, so I'll just show this with an example. Let us say the counter value is currently 5. Okay, so now it has loaded 5. Process A has loaded 5. Okay, to the counter. Now and then it has a context switch. Okay, now process B, now that is also loading now. Okay, so but now you have a preemption. Okay, process A is preempted by process B. Process B is actually, that is also loading 5, because 5 is the current counter value. Okay, and then it does add, so the counter value is added, it becomes 6. Okay, and then you're storing 6, and then you exited out. Then process B is done, right? So you come back here and then you continue with process A. But process A, what will it do? It will add 1 to the counter. What is the counter value? The counter is 5 here, because process A's counter value is 5 only, right? Even though it's a global variable, it has locally stored it and it did a context switch. Because of this, what happens? This will also report count as 6. But what should be the actual count? The actual count should be 7, okay? Because this has incremented 1, this has incremented 1. From 5, it should have become 6, and then it should have become 7. Okay, but it's not the case. It has become 6 only. This is because of the unwarranted context switch that happens. This is a very classic example of the task synchronization issues. Okay, now this is a racing issue. Why? Because it really depends on like when the process is context switching. Okay, the same thing can happen to process B also. If process B is interrupted by process A, then again the count will be. It really depends on who is racing, right? So that's the cause of this. It's not predictable. Now coming to talk of it, we have deadlocks. I'm sure like you'd have heard of deadlocks in your operating systems course. So deadlocks are it's a state where none of the processes are able to move forward because it is actually there's a dependency with another process and there is a cycle to it. Okay, so it's something like you have a mutual exclusion, which means a process can hold a resource, only one process can hold a resource, meaning that there's no resource sharing. Okay, the second one is hold and wait. The meaning is you hold something and then others should be waiting. Okay, and then you actually wait, I mean sorry, so not others, you will be waiting for other resources, you will not let go of your resource. Okay, so you need two resources. For example, you need both say audio and video. Okay, but you got audio, but you still need video, right? But I'll not let go of audio, I'll wait for an indefinite time to wait for video if I have that. And then third one is resource preemption. No resource preemption. No resource preemption is like you don't allow preemption, right? So my process cannot be broken. I mean I cannot be evicted at all. And third, finally you have circular wait. Okay, circular wait is I am waiting for person A, person A is waiting for person B, person B is waiting for me. Okay, so there is a circular wait. Now only if all these four conditions exist, then deadlock will result. Even if one of the condition is not true, deadlock will not occur. Okay, please keep this in mind. This is very very important. You need all these four conditions for deadlock to occur. Okay, so there are ways to handle deadlock. So first is you ignore deadlock, so you just restart the system, that's all. The other one is detect and recover. It's a very very complex thing to do. Once deadlock occurs and you want to come out of it, it takes a lot of resources to do it. Third one is avoid deadlock. This is like altogether you carefully allocate. It's a very conservative way of allocating resources, so you can avoid deadlock. And prevent deadlock is little bit like you have some kind of a protocol. You follow certain protocols to make sure that deadlock situation is avoided, and you don't get into all four of the above conditions together. Okay, so at least one you will try to not have. And very interestingly, there is something called as live lock. So live lock is also a lock. It's something like deadlock, but it's live. Okay, a good example of live lock is let us say there are two nice guys, right? Two nice people uh, who meet, and then they have one chair. Okay, so what will happen is this guy will say, "Sir, you please sit down." The other guy will say, "No, no, 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 you please sit down." And then both are very courteous. They are like too courteous to each other that both of them will decide, okay, let us both not sit down, both will end up standing. Okay, so that's the case of live lock. So what happens is both are live and you have resource, but it will not be used. Another example is if you walk in the corridor, right? So for and then it's a very narrow corridor, you see the other person also walking in the opposite direction, straight face to face to you. So you will move to the right. That guy will move to his left. Okay, so both of you will go to the same side, and then you go to the other side. Okay, so you, for a brief amount of time, you will only be walking sideways, left to right, left right you will do, but you will not move forward, right? So very brief moment you do that, right? So that's the situation of live lock. Now the problem with live lock is it is much more dangerous than deadlock, because deadlock you at least know these four conditions and you can avoid, but live lock, since the processes are nice, it's very hard to detect. Okay, and next concept is starvation. In starvation, it means like you want something to be done, but you are waiting indefinite amount of time. Because of that, a particular process will not be scheduled at all. Okay, so it will starve for CPU. So that's your starvation. We'll quickly go through this example. Can you guys see the screen here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it's a very short clip. It's only 7 seconds long. But we used to do it in our operating systems class. It used to be fun. Okay, dining philosopher's problem. I'll tell you what is race condition with respect to dining philosopher's problem. I'm sure you would have heard of dining philosopher's problem in your OS course. Dining philosopher's problem is you have n number of philosophers sitting on a table, round table. Okay, they have a plate in front of them with spaghetti or something to eat, and then each of them have a fork on both sides. Okay, so the forks are, there are only n forks, one placed on the side of the plate. But the condition is like the philosopher will either think or he will eat. Okay, if he eats, then he will take both the forks. He needs both the forks to eat. He cannot eat with one fork. Okay, better it's named as chopstick. It makes more sense to name it as chopstick, but here the picture says fork, so we'll use fork. But he needs two of these to eat. Okay, so then what could happen? This is the situation. It might happen in your real operating system. Okay, just watch this video. First, suddenly they think they want to eat. Let's do this now.
One, two, three, start.
See, whoever got it, eat. See, so this is what it is, right? So I just play it once more. Let's do this now.
One, two, three, start.
See, whoever got it, eat. So you see, this girl did not get her chance. Okay, so there are only those many forks, right? N forks there. The guy next to her, right? So the guy who was here, he actually this guy got his two forks. Similarly, I think this girl also got two forks, I believe, but this girl did not. Okay, so the thing is, that's a typical race condition. The next time when you play, right, this girl would get and this guy may not get. Okay, so it really depends on like who is racing first to get the resource. So that is a typical example of racing condition. Now what will happen to this girl? So this girl will starve. She wants to eat, but she doesn't have a fork. So unless this guy puts down the fork, right, this girl will starve. Okay, so that's your starvation. So now we have several situations here. First one is when we will have some kind of a protocol. Everybody will pick the left fork. Okay, so if everybody picks the left fork, what will happen? They will not have right fork, because the guy on the right side would also have picked the left fork, correct? So because of this, everybody will think, okay, I picked my left fork, I am going to pick my right fork. I don't have a right fork. I will wait. And then he will wait indefinitely. Okay, the same way the other guys will also think. All the philosophers will think, I will take my left fork, I will wait for my right fork. So that is the deadlock situation. Now the other scenario is what we saw, right? uh, the race condition. So where you are hungry, you pick the left fork. Okay, and then you actually uh, right, so whoever is trying to lift the right fork first, you grab whoever is hungry, they pick the left fork first, and then they try to pick the right fork again. But then what happens is, if you if the guy on the right side picks your fork, then you will not have fork. So this is the race condition we saw in the previous clip. The third one is live lock and starvation. So here what happens, the philosophers are very nice. So they say, we will take our left fork, we will wait, we will count 10. Okay, and then what will happen is, I will see whether I have my right fork. If I don't have my right fork, I will put down my left fork. So what will happen if everybody is doing the same thing, right? Everyone will pick their left fork, everybody will count to 10, and everybody will put back the left fork again because there is no right fork. Okay, so everybody is nice here, but being nice is the problem. Okay, you pick your left fork, you count to 10, you see there is a right fork, there is no right fork because the other guy has not put it right, he has also taken his left fork. So now what happens, you put down the left fork, then you again pick the left fork again because you're attempting again. So you will keep doing the same thing over and over and over, and then you will starve. So this is the example of live lock. That's why live lock is dangerous. Okay, you think you are a very nice guy, you're trying to help, you will say okay, I will put down my fork, and then later you will try to attempt, you will just end up in a vicious circle. Okay, so that's about your dining philosopher's problem. Next we have producer consumer problem, or it's also called as bounded buffer problem, where you have producer will produce all the data for you. Okay, imagine this to be like a game where you have to put a box on the table. Okay, and you can only put it's a long table, and you can only put say 10 boxes there. So what will you do, you will put the first box, you push it to the other side, you put the second box, push it to the other side. On the, you're the producer. Okay, you keep pushing the boxes in on the table. On the other end there will be a consumer, his job is to take one box at a time. Okay, so now what will happen, you both, right, producer and the consumer, you have to synchronize, in a synchronized way you have to work. Now if the consumer is slow, then what will happen, I will produce a box, I will try to put it on the table, but then at some point you are very slow, the consumer is too slow, I will have to not put the box anywhere, my box will be lost, I have to drop it down. Okay, because I keep producing boxes, I have to put it on the table, but then I don't have place to put my box, the box will be lost. Okay, so this is called as your buffer overrun. Okay, overflow or of a buffer overrun. On the other hand, if consumer is fast and producer is slow, what will happen, you will try to put the box in a very slow way, but the consumer will consume it, taga taga taga, he'll consume. Okay, then he will not have a box to consume at all. Okay, now imagine in the digital world what will happen, right, you only go by indexing, you try to see, okay, I will try to get data from this address. Okay, but the producer is too slow, the moment the consumer would assume that his box is ready in say the place D. Okay, but producer is too slow, D doesn't have the latest data, the consumer will consume the wrong data, he will consume the old data. Okay, because producer is slow, he will not know that the D data is old, so he will still consume it, it will become old data. So this situation is called buffer underrun. Okay, so in other words it will be an empty buffer. Okay, you're trying to read from an empty buffer, you will go into that issue. Okay, then we have readers writers problem. In readers writers problem, it's very similar to the bounded buffer only, but here you are doing reading and writing. Okay, so what happens is if you remember the initial counter example we saw, right, somebody is trying to update the counter and somebody is trying to read the counter and use it. Now these two have to be synchronized. Let us say I try to write something to a buffer and somebody is reading from that buffer. Okay, so now everything should be synchronized, otherwise I will get wrong data. Okay, so that's what your readers writers problem is about. Next concept is priority inversion. In priority inversion, what happens is your lower priority job, right, somehow gets a higher priority. Okay, so how this happens is, let us take three processes, process A, B and C, and C has the lowest priority, B has medium priority, and process A has the highest priority. Process C, it is running, but process C has a resource that is used, that should be used by A. A also wants that resource. Okay, let us say that it's a printer. Okay, and the printer is a very high priority printer. Process C has already it is holding the printer already. Okay, in this case what will happen is, process C is holding the printer and it will get preempted because process B is coming in between. Okay, now process B will be running, and then process A is entering. It says, hey, I am the highest priority, you get out. So process B will get preempted and process A will start running. But now process A wants that resource. But who has that resource? The resource is held by your process C. Okay, the printer, you already put a lock to the printer. Process C has put a lock. Hey, this is my printer, I put a lock. Okay, so nobody can use it. Now what will happen? Process A is blocked. Even though process A is the highest priority job, it doesn't have printer because somebody has logged it and left. Okay, watchman has left the office. He has locked the office and he went. Now the boss cannot enter his office, right? He cannot use the resource because he doesn't have key. So something like that. So now process A should wait. So what will it do? It will be like, okay, great, I am blocked, so anyone else, you continue. Then process B will say, hey, I don't have any resource dependency, I will continue. So process B will continue, and after process B finishes, process C will continue, because that's the one that has printer key, right? So it will use the key, it will finish executing, and then it will have the last laugh. It will say, ha ha ha, I finished. Even though I am lower priority job, I finished early. Then it will return the key to your process A, then process A will continue. So what is happening here is, even though process B has lesser priority than A, B finished first. Okay, B finished before A. And similarly, process C, even though it has lesser priority than A, that also finished early. So some priority inversion has happened. A has become the least priority job here, but it should have been the highest priority job. That's exactly what priority inversion is. Now, how to overcome this? This can be overcome by two ways. So one is priority inheritance. What will you do is, if a process wants a printer kind of a resource, then you will elevate the process priority to the to that of the highest priority job. You will call process C as high priority job. Okay, so in that case, what will happen? Process C will be running, then it will not be preempted by B. Okay, in other words, what you will do is, B, you will say, shut up, even though I am low priority job. Okay, C will say, even though I am a low priority job, I have the key to the printer. Now I am the most powerful guy. Okay, you shut up, I will finish executing. Okay, so it will ask B to shut up, and then it will finish executing. And after B executes, right? I mean, after C executes, it will say, now you run. Okay, process B will continue running. Okay, so after that, process A will preempt B and it will run. Somehow we leverage this problem. Even though B is waiting for some time, you at least say that, okay, because I came first, you will not evict me, because I have the priority of, I have the highest priority device with me. Okay, so you inherit the priority based on that. Now similarly, you have another thing. It's a very similar approach. It's called priority ceiling. In this, what will happen is, you put the ceiling, like you give the priority of the printer. Okay, you say printer has priority 1, top priority. Now anybody who uses printer will get priority 1, even though process C is low priority process. If it wants printer, it will take priority of the printer. Priority of printer is 1. So you, for a brief amount of time, process C will become a priority 1 job. After it uses printer, it doesn't need printer, back it will be back to its low priority mode. Okay, in both cases, what happens is, there is a hidden priority inversion. In any case, you see process B is waiting, right? Process B will wait because process C, even though it's low priority, since it has higher priority device, it has to wait, right? So that problem is still there. But anyway, this is the solution we have. All right. So now we'll just skim through process synchronization techniques. I will not go in detail because you're exhaustively learning it in operating systems. I don't want to bore you with that. So you have task synchronization methods. So first one is mutual exclusion. Mutual exclusion can be done by busy waiting or sleep and wake up. Busy waiting is nothing but so mutual exclusion. First, let's understand mutual exclusion. Mutual exclusion means, if I am holding on to a resource, right, no one else will hold the resource. It's like, I won't share the resource. That's what it means. Now what will happen is, uh, if uh, if I need a resource and somebody is using that resource, what should I do? what will I do is, like, one way is busy waiting or spin lock. What I will do is, I will just say spin. I will just spin in an infinite while loop until that I'll just check in a while loop saying, hey, is the device ready? No. Oh, okay, I'll wait. Hey, is the device ready? No. Okay, I'll wait. Hey, is the device ready? No, I'll wait. Hey, is the device ready? Oh yeah, it's ready. Okay, I'll take. So until the device, somebody releases the device, you will be in a loop. You will be in an infinite loop checking whether the device is ready or not. This is unnecessary waste of your CPU time. The other option is sleep and wake up. What will you do is, you will go check, hey, is the device ready? No, it's not ready. Okay, never mind, I'll go to sleep. Then you go to sleep. Okay, you will be like a dormant process, and after some time your timer expires. You come after like some time, you come and check, hey, now is it ready? Okay, now you will be woken up if it is ready. Okay, somebody will say, operating system will say, hey, you wanted that resource, right? It's ready, come on, wake up. So like that it works. So it's better than your spin lock. Okay, so again, I'm not going into these details. Busy waiting and sleep and wake up. Okay, so in that implementation, you have these semaphores, binary semaphores, counting semaphores. So binary semaphore is also called as mutex, right? So I'm not going into detail because I think it's again covered in your operating system. So I'll just leave it for you to go through this offline. All right. Okay, I will just cover this. I'll just take another 5 minutes, and then we will call it done. Okay, so we'll wrap it up. How to choose a real-time operating system? So this is one of the very important questions for you, especially from VTU point of view also. So there are two things. Okay, when you want to choose a real-time operating system, there is something called as functional requirements, and the other one is non-functional requirements. So functional requirements are those that affect the functionality of the embedded system itself. So you need to have certain requirements for the operating system too. First one is processor support. Okay, so it's not necessary. So you don't need a high end processor. So you have to choose which processor you need for your embedded system. It can be a microcontroller, or it can be a high end processor. You decide based on your requirement, right? The second one is memory requirement. What kind of memory you need? Do you need a ROM, or do you need a flash, or you need like an exhaustive a hard drive with or SSD and like a full-fledged memory mapped device? So you need to consider all that. Third thing is real-time capability. So as we saw earlier, right? So what about the real time? Is it hard real time, soft real time? Is it real time at all? And things like that. And kernel and interrupt latency. So once we decide the real time, right, so what kind of real time it is, you need to also know about the interrupt latency and things like that. Then we have inter-process communication, task synchronization. What kind of IPC are you going to use? We saw several methods, right? So we saw message passing, we saw memory mapped IO, and all these things. So all these things will you decide like which one to implement. The next one is modularization support. So you need to have modularization because it's very useful when you want to extend your embedded system. You want version 1, version 2, version 3. So then it's better that it's easier to upgrade, and then it's easier to modify also. If there is some problem in one module, you just replace that module. It will be better. Okay, so that's why it works. Then support for networking and communication. So what kind of network, what kind of network drivers that you need? Okay, and what kind of communication protocol are you going to use? Then we have development and debugging support. Okay, so that's very important again. So what kind of debug environment are you going to use? And this is very, very useful because things don't go smoothly. You always hit some problem, and you need a way of debugging things. Then we have non-functional requirements. Okay, so non-functional requirements are more to do with what to say, the execution of the project and things like that. So you have custom developed or off the shelf. So are you going to build the embedded system from scratch? Are you going to build it all by yourself, or are you going to use a customized chip that is already available out there, right? So you make that difference. So we saw different type of processors, FPGAs or COTS or microcontroller and things like that, right? So which one are you going to use? Next is cost. So you have to you have to fix the cost. You have to say, okay, is it going to be a high end device? So if you take thermal sensor, a thermal sensor is available from 50 rupees all the way to say 1000 rupees or 2000 rupees, right? There are so many variations in your thermal sensor. I mean, the range, the sensitivity, so many things are there, the lifetime. So based on that, you decide the cost. And then again, development and debugging tools available. Okay, so what kind of tools are available for your debugging environment? And ease of use. So how easy is it to use your commercial RTOS? And finally, after sales. So once you have sales, then what do you do? Like how do you have a service, and how do you approve? I mean, how do you actually take care of the bugs? How do you fix those? How do you release these patches and all these things? Okay, so right. So this is again, I'm just reiterating. This is a very important question. Okay, how to choose an RTOS: functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Okay, so with that we come to the close of this chapter. So we will see again on Monday. Okay, I'll just stop the recording.